Judo is Japanese. In Japanese means you bow. There's deference to your sensei. You bow before getting on the mat. You bow when you leave. There's a lot more formality to it. Whereas Jiu-Jitsu is Brazilian. It's, slap hands, fist bump. It's a lot more casual. It's a lot more rigid. Honestly, I think a little more rigidity is good for the kids. I love making the kids line up and bow. I think it's good for them to bow to each other before they, go into randori or a sparring situation and bow after. I think it teaches them something. And every school has a little bit of a different culture about how strict or formal they are or are not. Kama Jiu-Jitsu, we're pretty informal, and that's a good thing. Judo being Japanese, there's a little more structure and formality to it, and some people really like that. But there's degrees of that too. I've been to some schools where when you're doing your warm-ups, you count in Japanese, and other schools you don't do that so much. So it's really up to the instructor to set the tone. That said, even though at Kama Jiu-Jitsu, and I think most Jiu-Jitsu schools, but Kama Jiu-Jitsu, we're pretty informal, we're friends, we meet for lunch and coffee and so on. People refer to each other by the first name. There's still a level of respect. There's still a level of, deference to the upper belts and especially to Professor Ryan, because they are giving you their knowledge. They're giving you their time, sharing with you, their experiences, their techniques, their takes on the techniques. So there is a level of informality, but there's also deep respect for our instructors, and the students have a lot of respect for each other. Unless we're on freaking Group Me, and then it just falls apart. You can edit that out. So the kids, we have made a few changes to the kids program very recently, because I do think, especially for younger kids, trying to understand the nuances of sport judo and Kama Jiu-Jitsu and where one stops and the other begins is kind of hard, right? So when you're going into a tournament, a judo tournament, being on your back and getting pinned causes you lose. So their escapes obviously have to be solid, but it also gives the kids an incentive to go to their belly. They know they're not getting pinned, and that's not the habit that we want to instill in our kids for the kids program. Older kids can kind of understand, okay, if we're going into a tournament, then for this setting, we need to modify how we do it, but younger kids have a hard time doing that. So now, we're just focusing on good, solid fundamentals of self-defense oriented jiu-jitsu. We're not as bound by the rules of the next tournament or, the belting criteria for judo. But my hope is, once they get a solid foundation in the basic throws that we teach in our kids program and have really excellent ground fighting skills, when they do get older and they can distinguish between this is a sport context, these are the rules of the game, versus this is something that's good for self-defense or more universal applications, then those kids will move to competition, BJJ competition or judo competition seamlessly. Right? So here's self-defense, here's sport BJJ, here's sport judo, here's how they interact, here's what you do differently for this context versus that context. But what we're trying to do, and I think we're starting to really get there, is to try to find the universals that'll work across those contexts. Things that are good for self-defense, good for sport, judo or jiu-jitsu, that are just fundamental things that work in all circumstances, and make that the core of what we teach, especially to the kids. And then when they want to branch out and do competition, we might do a few weeks of rules-based training, but that cannot be the fundamental focus of what we're doing. So people have different thoughts about this. I think competition and sports instills good values in kids. And that could be any sport. That could be tennis, it could be swimming, it could be wrestling, judo, whatever. I think sports are good for kids in terms of learning how to win gracefully, gives them something to work for and train for, and also teaches them how to be good losers and to learn from their mistakes in competition. That said, we have had some of our students do really, really well in competition. But for the average kid that does Kama Jiu-Jitsu versus an average kid that all they do is sport judo, it's going to be really, really difficult for our kids to excel unless they become very, very specialized. So you gain something by becoming very, very specialized and focusing on the rules of the sport. You can win medals and you can get first place and so on, but you also lose something in terms of the fundamental skills of self-defense. We don't want our kids' instinct when they hit the ground is to go into turtle. Whereas a sport judo school, the kid's instinct will be to go into turtle. If staying on your back and getting pinned means you lose in a competition setting, but it's better than someone taking your back and choking you out or striking you in the back of the head, we would rather our kids lose doing the right thing than to win doing something that's not good for self-defense. So I think there will be, and there'll continue to be, a group of kids that go to competition, do really well at competition, excel at competition, but when you have a school that's focused on competition and a school that's not so much focused on competition, the average in one is not equivalent to the average in the other for that setting. So basically, the one of the modifications we made is that judo has a set curriculum. It's the Gokyo no Waza. You learn certain techniques and you learn them in order. And by and large, we stick to that, to the Gokyo, because the first set are easier throws to learn, and then the second set kind of builds on the first set, so you see things there. But some of the techniques, honestly, in judo, are things that you might call high risk, high reward, right? So, it might be, let's use an example of a throw. Some of the sacrifice throws, for example, right? So in a judo tournament, you execute a tomo onagi or a sumegaishi. That's where you sit back and you put your foot up and you launch them over. That's a wonderful technique. But if it fails, then in a judo context, you're kind of in guard. You wait for the referee to stand you up. In a self-defense context, it means you just pulled some guy on top of you and you're on the ground, right? So certain techniques, even though we might touch on them, they have less of a self-defense application, or certain executions of techniques are a little bit different. So for example, a lot of the hip throws, the way we drill them in judo, and you can watch videos of this on YouTube, is you enter into the throw, you do your hip throw, and you have so much forward momentum, you end up rolling right over the person. And their back hit the ground, but then you've lost engagement, you've lost connection with the person you just threw. So we've had to modify some of the finishes of throws to think about, okay, when it goes from the throw to the ground, what's the transition into groundwork? What's the transition to newaza? So that's the stuff we've been focusing on and modifying a little bit. Yeah, so I'd say that's a big mindset difference with the throws. Is that, again, in judo, their back hits the mat. That's an ippon. The match is over, and that's kind of a competition mindset. In a jiu-jitsu mindset or a self-defense mindset, it's the throw is just the entry into the rest of the fight. So if you're going to do the throw, you have to make sure you have solid control, that you're not breaking your own posture in order to execute the throw. You're not going all the way over the opponent, and that you're maintaining control throughout the throw through the finish of the throw. So we focus on maybe fewer techniques that are a little more higher percentage, things that are easy to learn, especially for an older demographic, things that are, I would say, low risk, high reward, and then have the highest potential for controlling the fight on the ground when the fight gets to the ground.
Mainstream judo does not have strikes. Why do you think that's the case?
Strikes were taken out very early on. Kano said no strikes because he wanted something. I mean, so judo, Kano, his contribution to the martial arts was he took classical jiu-jitsu, which was taught to samurai, right? This was a battlefield art. It was, police and military art. And he wanted something that anyone from all walks of life, men, women, young, old, can practice with less of a, pure combative focus, but also something that, was good for your health, was good for your character. Judo is taught in schools all across Japan. So the strikes were something that he saw was dangerous. He didn't want people getting knocked out, their teeth getting knocked out, their nose broken. So they took out strikes to make it more something that would be friendly to the masses and less of a battlefield, kill or be killed type of system. When Kano was studying judo, this was the Meiji era in Japan. So they were modernizing their military, going from the old samurai system to a more modern military. And jiu-jitsu kind of got a bad reputation as being something that like thugs were doing and prize fighters, and it kind of fell into disrepute. So he kind of wanted to make it something that would be accessible to everybody and didn't have that same sort of blood and gore, broken bones, broken teeth kind of connotation to it. So he took out a lot of the stuff that he deemed to be dangerous or not safe to practice, and part of that was strikes. That said, the judo curriculum, the classical judo curriculum, had strikes in it. It just wasn't something that was done in randori or free sparring. People get into the martial arts for different reasons. Some people get into judo and they want to become world champions. They want to compete, and that's what they live for. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's fantastic. It's a sport. I think someone who is trained at a high level in judo or sport jiu-jitsu against most attackers that don't know what they're doing, have no training, will do really well. So if you want to do the sport oriented judo or jiu-jitsu to win trophies and medals, and that's what excites you, go for it. But, for a lot of people, they have really no interest in competing. All they really want is some solid self-defense. And if that's your focus, then that's great. For me, I started martial arts when I was really high school, college. So I was young, and sort of, the trophies and the competitions were kind of what motivated me. When I got a little bit older and, honestly, the body just doesn't keep up with the training, I'm like, okay, if I'm not training for a competition, what am I training for, right? If I'm not training for, the nationals or the state championships, then what am I training for? And it became quickly, I got to, transition to something else. So I started here, and it's more self-defense focused, and I'm learning new things that honestly, over 20 years of martial arts training, were new to me, and that's really cool. So you can never stop learning, you can never stop progressing. So whatever your focus is, that's fine. Everyone has different reasons for training, and I think more power to you. Even if it's just for health, right? Even if it's just to keep in shape, then great, more power to you.